Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to do the Peripheral, Season 1, Episode 6. So, it seems that I would go on to describe this episode as magnanimous, efficient, and scrumtrelescent. Why would I go on and use all these big fat words when I can just simply state that this episode was okay? Because it seems that the writers of this episode want to go on and be very clever, and they want to, of course, have their thesauruses out and want to seem educated. And to me, I am just like, I could care less about the dialogue of this show, especially when it goes on and is to, like, not really seem to go anywhere. By the end of this episode, I'm just like, okay, like, it seems like we took a long bit of episode to have some interesting story, but there's also just quite a bit of time where I'm like, where is this going? Like, this seemed like a delay of game for this episode to me. So, like, they're just delaying things. So, with that said, let's, of course, go into some of our characters here. So, we have Connor, who it seems is trying to take the Bruce Willis surrogate route. And if you were to have ever gone on and seen the Bruce Willis movie Surrogate, where Bruce Willis's character is confined to his home, he is put into some, like, container or something like that, and instead of him going out in the world, we have this robotic, like, doppelganger that looks just like Bruce Willis that is going out in the world and serving as him. And so, in almost like a VR kind of goofy approach. So, it seems in the movie we end up having a person going on and start to knock off surrogates and have these string of surrogate murders. So Bruce Willis ends up going on to no longer be his surrogate, to try and track down and hunt down this murderer by having him be a normal human. So, with that said, it seems that Connor is to try to go on and do the opposite approach, where instead of Connor wanting to become a real boy, instead, Connor wants to become a surrogate. To where Connor is to go on and be contained somewhere and have him just be connected brainwave-wise to a doppelganger of sorts that is to be in the future. So, and we kind of really go into Connor's backstory, and this also ties into the episode from before between both Wes and Grace, I believe, that were going on to talk about that whole scenario with that kind of pyramid mechanism thing that Wes was looking on at this military scenario. We also have Flynn that ends up telling Wilf about the time of which that she had scanned her eye into that that mechanism, and maybe that had given Flynn a bit of information that someone is looking for, that Charisse is looking for. So we have Flynn and Wolf going on to these butchers, it seems, to get a bit of information from them, which has us find out that they are to be able to customize things. And it all ties into the prior episode before, where Wilf was to kind of take out these pieces from these doctors and possibly figure out where they are from. So, we also have Bob. And the Constantine story, which is like, okay, that was probably the most interesting thing about this whole episode, was both their stories, as we go on and have Constantine starting to believe that maybe he is really to not be able to trust anybody. And we have Bob, who goes on with the pickets to then get tortured for possibly information of which Bob doesn't really know. So, with that said, let's go on and let's double fire this bad boy up. I gotta state that with the dialogue in this episode, I really didn't catch much of it, because a lot of the dialogue I was like, okay, we have words being thrown around like neoprim, and we have stuff like words like brine being thrown around, and all of this crap, and I was like, who cares? I could care less. Like, because immediately when they're like, they have a sequence of times of which the people are to seem very educated, I'm just like, I immediately just want to heavily tune out, because that immediately just is to have the writers be like, ha ha ha, like, we want to be really smart with a show where the dialogue doesn't really matter. The dialogue is not something, especially in this episode, where by the end of it I'm like, oh man, I really need to have paid attention to every bit of this dialogue, because it ends up factoring into how this episode ends. No. A lot of the dialogue just feels like a throwaway, and is to just bide time until eventually we get into what is to be like not really interesting by the end of the episode, but there's certain stories that are. So, anyways, so there's not a good payout to this episode, in all honesty, but there is stories that is good enough, but it is what it is. Let's get to it. So, let's talk about Texas. Outbreak 2028. So, we of course have Burton, Connor, Leon, and whoever else that I had forgotten about. They are going on this military mission, and Burton is going on and stating that they've already gotten intel about certain dogs that are to possibly have booby traps in them. And so, immediately I would go on and not have a single soul go to any number of these dogs that are obviously booby trapped, but we have one of the men complaining about how the dog is yelping, and somebody's going to go on and need to do something. So, Connor ends up being the guy who is to now have arms and legs and whatever. So, Connor ends up walking over there to start snapping the barbed wire off of this dog. And so Connor's like, I don't know what you guys are talking about. I don't know what you guys are complaining about. But then all of a sudden, Connor, the further and further he looks at this dog, is to realize that this dog is heavily wired up. He notices something's on the collar. Then he notices that there's wires even going into this dog's belly, stating that this dog is about to blow. So we then have Connor, who then is to wake up from a horrible nightmare, and Burton is to try to take care of him, and that's how the episode, I believe, begins. So, but there's a lot of times where there's a lot of things going on, and I'll just kind of get to the stuff that I think is to be more interesting than other things. So, we have, of course, Connor at some point that is getting comforted by Leon. Leon is to realize how Connor is to be getting nightmares, and so Leon is like, well, hey, like, I can go on and comfort you and just kind of take away some nightmares of yours, and do that through the hoptics. And Connor is like, no. And Leon's like, well, I can sing you and I can serenade you and hope that you'll go on and be comforted in that way, because Leon has been told that his voice is to go on and soothe people. And so once Leon starts singing, Connor's like, okay, like let's connect to the hoptics, and like you can go on and get my nightmare so I can sleep soundly for one night. So Leon goes on to connect into Connor, and he realizes that is a mistake, because Connor is to be having this horrible nightmare about him being in the hospital without his legs, and like he's screaming and hollering for anyone to help him. And so Leon is getting a sift of this, and he is like, oh my god, my legs. So Connor is going on and sleeping. So, like, I guess that worked out in the end, but maybe not for one person. So we also had Connor that was to talk to Leon before the nap that he took. We had Connor who was stating about the headset that he went on to kind of temporary be Flynn for a little bit, and how like Connor really liked uh like putting that on. And so Connor is at some point thinking that he wants to go on and possibly have that connection be a little bit more permanent. So Connor goes on to make his way back to his vehicle so he can kind of drive around. And Connor ends up bumping into Macon. So, because Connor is trying to adjust uh, his vehicle so he can kind of really latch onto it, because he keeps smacking into it and he can't go on and connect to his vehicle so he can drive off. So Connor is adjusting with these crescent wrenches, and all of a sudden it's to see Macon, and it seems that Macon is to come by to go on and help Connor, because I guess the people at the bar had called to possibly get rid of Connor. And Connor is telling these guys, it's like, well, hey, why couldn't they have just done that themselves? And the guy's like, I don't know, but like I'm here now. So Connor is to talk to Macon, and it's to talk to him about like, well, hey, like I've heard somewhere that people can go on and get like IVs dripped into them, so that way they'll never have to go on and like need like water or need food or whatever. And we have Macon who's like, well, yeah, that is true, but like, why do you want to go on and do something like that? So Connor's like, well, like, I think it's gonna like be necessary in for me in the future, because Connor wants to go on and possibly get into these headsets and possibly just kind of live in the future forever. So it seems that Burton is to go on and is to hear what Connor's plan is. So Burton goes on to, of course, give Connor these prosthetics to forcibly have him try these out. And Connor wants nothing to do with that, because he's like, well, no, like, I'm going to get my legs in the future. So Burton's like, how about you try all these prosthetics out and, like, see if they really do help you. And weirdly enough, the initials on these prosthetics have the words MF on it. And so Burton is to state, it's like, well, more than likely, like, his mom was to state that the prosthetics were to probably mean my friend, and instead of MFers. So we go on and cover let's cover some other things. So let's cover the Constantine story, because that's really interesting. So Constantine. So after Constantine going through his accident, he makes his way back to the office to ask one of the officers there if he can go on and be able to check out those vehicles that, of course, have the like the see-through tints on them. And the officer ends up stating to Constantine that he needs to go on and get the approval from the sheriff. And he's like, well, why do I need to do that? So, come to find out, we have Constantine that ends up meeting up with Sheriff Jackman in the bathroom anyways. So, because we all of a sudden have Constantine who is dribbling blood from his nose. So, Constantine meets up with the sheriff in the bathroom as Constantine is trying to clean his nose of blood. So, we have Sheriff Jackman that is going on and stating to Constantine, it's like, well, hey, like, why are you even here? Like, you're on leave. Like, you're on paid leave. So why are you here? Like, you should be gone. So, all of a sudden, when Constantine is to look at Sheriff Jackman as he's going to the toilet, we notice that Sheriff Jackman, through the eyes of Constantine, has the same shoes as the guy who is to drag Bob out of Constantine's car. So Constantine is to draw the conclusion that it's like, oh my god, the sheriff had gone on to help whoever had gone on to drag Bob and make him disappear. Or more than likely, the sheriff had taken these vehicles, and that's why Constantine could not go on and look into them. So, we have Constantine then ends up talking to the nurse, who I believe is Dee Dee. So, Constantine talks to this doctor, or this doctor, nurse, whichever. So, Constantine is talking to her and is going through this concussion test, and he's kind of, with his eyes, trying to track these things and try to follow them. And we, of course, have the doctor that rules that Constantine has a concussion. So, that this guy should not go on and kind of do his duties, and instead just kind of take the paid leave and try not to go on and be the frog from the Scorpion and the Frog story. Because, of course, even like Robot Chicken had covered this story at one point of their episode. So we have the frog and we have the Scorpion, and they're both by this pond. So the Scorpion is to ask the frog, it's like, well, hey, could I go on and jump on your back and kind of have you like swim and get me past this pond? And the frog's like, okay, as long as you don't do anything that's within your nature. So the Scorpion's like, okay, fine. So the Scorpion takes the frog and along this pond, and by the time that they finish and they're on the other side of things, we have the Scorpion that stings the frog and is having the frog almost to die here. And the frog ends up turning to the Scorpion. It's like, well, hey, like, why did you go on and sting me? And the Scorpion states, it's like, well, it's in my nature. I'm also thinking about it. Nature is kind of like forest and whatever. It's a whole joke of whatever. So the doctor is going on and telling Constantine to not become the frog. So she's stating that at some point they should just go on and leave town because something is really going on here, and they should not try to be a part of it. They should try to be making their way out. So we have that all covered. We also had Constantine that was talking to Burton, and And really just Burton, the most memorable thing between the dialogue between the two of them is Burton is going on and talking about an ambush. And so, because Constantine is mentioning how he was T-boned and he couldn't really see who hit him, and so on and so forth. And so Burton's like, well, yeah, that seemed like an ambush. But Burton is also talking about, like, well, hey, like, I've been in a plethora of different kind of ambushes, and there's certain different kind of styles to them. So, like, Burton is just trying to tell Constantine to just kind of look out for the next ambush because it's probably going to happen. So, now let's go on and let's go into the Bob stuff. So, Bob is to wake up next to Corbell and Mary, and they are they're to have brined their meat or whatever. So Mary and, of course, Corbell are fixing this meat, and Mary's stating it's like, well, hey, like, you didn't do it too well now, did you? Because otherwise it's going to taste like leather. And so Mary ends up trying it, and Mary's like, no, I think it's just right. And Corbell's like, well, I think you missed some magical words there. And Mary's like, well, what? And that Corbell was right as usual. So all of a sudden, Corbell is to realize that Bob is kind of conscious. So Corbell's like, oh yeah, like, hey, here's some meat. Like, there you go. Like, have a meal. So Bob is to realize that he has a collar over his neck, and he's like, well, hey, like, what is this collar for? And Corbell tries to, in a very elegant way, explain what is really going on. And Bob has this kitchen knife, and so he almost tries to stab Corbell with this knife. And we have Mary that goes on and is to shock Bob and have him drop onto the floor. So, in the most layman terms for Bob here, if he goes on and tries to kill either one of them, shock. He will be shock collared. So, supposedly this is a thing of strength between 1 to 10, and this guy had only handled a 3. So, telling us that more than likely it is to possibly become even stronger. So, we have Bob, who is talking to Corbell, and Corbell is talking about how his meat is to be put a certain way, and that it is to be brined. So, Corbell states that it seems that somebody's going into his kitchen and messing with his meat. And so Corbell doesn't like that, and he wants to figure out who it is. And Bob might have that information, which of course Bob won't, because Bob doesn't know who he had been called. So, but Corbell weirdly just thinks that Bob has answers that Bob doesn't really have. So, Corbell leaves, and so Mary and Bob are now by themselves. And so Mary is going on and stating to Bob here, it's like, well, hey, if you go on and you just give me the information that we need, like, I'll go on and I'll give you something in return. Mary is to state, it's like, well, like, don't get your mind very dirty, because, like, I'll give you something, but just kind of, like, be reasonable. Bob ends up asking Mary about this fish tank. It's like, well, hey, is that salt water in the tank? And Mary goes on about this whole story about her having salt water in the tank, and when one fish would die, it started to become a pattern that a lot of the other fish would die. So Mary finally decided to just put fresh water into the tank and then it seemed that all the fish seemingly were doing well. So we had Bob that goes on to pick up this unusual item. It's probably like a paperweight or something. So Bob picks up this item and is to take it and bash it against this fish tank. And Mary goes on and tries to shock Bob. Bob falls over. And so we all of a sudden have this water bursting through this fish tank. And both Mary and Bob are both wet. So Bob goes on and tries to attack Mary. Mary shocks Bob, but before Mary does that, Bob grabs onto Mary. Both Mary and Bob are both wet. Both of them get shocked simultaneously. And now Bob ends up waking up before Mary does. So Bob is probably go on and torture Mary now and get even. So, and to probably quickly get some information that he needs. So, now that that's all covered, we have, of course, Flynn. Flynn ends up going on with a mission with Wilf, and is to kind of see some things about this town. So, Mary and Wilf are to go on to, and I'll get to the Ainsley thing in a minute here. Like, it really, like, bears no real weight, but it is what it is. So, we have Flynn and Wilf that go outside to just kind of do some sightseeing. And Flynn is complaining to Wilf how it seems that so many people are so distant from one another. And Flynn asks Wilf if that's just some, like, if there's some, like, illness being spread around. And Wilf is just like, oh no, like, if anything, like, the whole purpose of this is for you to go on and adjust your fingers, and you would find that all these people aren't really real. That there isn't so many people in this part of town. That they're all just these holograms. Then Wilf would go on and state that certain buildings aren't even real either, that they're also holograms also. And Wilf goes on to force Flynn to adjust this thing and realize that there's a whole bunch of buildings that aren't really there. So Flynn is like, oh my god, like, this future is so weird. Like, why somebody would take this extra effort to hologram all these things just seems so unusual. So we have Flynn that goes on and tells Wilf about how she, of course, was to have had that eye being scanned from episodes before when she was Burton, and maybe she has some information that Sherry wants, because Wilf was going on and talking to Flynn about that whole situation. So we had both Flynn and we had both Wilf that are wanting to track down those doctors from before that Wilf had kind of taken something out of their necks. So we had Wilf that goes to this butcher shop and is asked about the toad in the hole. And we have both Reggie and Abigail that go on to state, it's like, well, we don't do that anymore. Like, we don't do that here. So Wilf is like, well, no, I heard you do a pretty good toad in the hole. And so we all of a sudden have Flynn that is to also talk about her being who she is, and is to want these people to help her. So they go on and like, well, I guess we can go on and figure something out. So Flynn goes and sits in this chair, and Reggie is to kind of look into this girl's eyes and so on and so forth. So we have Reggie's like, well, I can go on and I can customize like titanium like fingernails, and you can kind of claw through whatever. and they're retractable, like as if she's going to be Wolverine. And so we, of course, have Flynn that's like, no, 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 no. Like, I want, eye customization. And so Reggie's like, okay, do you want, like, night vision, fiber optic? What do you want? Do you like infrared? What do you want? So we have Flynn that states, oh no, I just want a human eye put in there. And so both Reggie and Abigail run off because they realize who this is. So Flynn starts to fight them, and so Reggie already realizes that this is going to be a losing battle, as Wolf isn't even involved in it. So Reggie then goes on to explain to both Wolf and Flynn about neoprim, or neoprim. And it's to consistently keep stating this word as if it means anything to me. And so that goes on and gives both Flynn and Wilf the answer that they need, so they walk off. But Wilf is to go on and have to clean up, of course, Flynn, because she has a very bloodied face. So both Wilf and Flynn are just kind of talking things out. Dialogue that really, again, doesn't really mean much. But so, pushing on. So, we have Abigail. Let me say this correctly. Ainsley. Why did I say Abigail? We had Ainsley. Ainsley goes on to this big, massive green field and is to just continue to just walk around and enjoy the scenery. And all of a sudden we have Beatrice that goes on to interrupt Ainsley to tell her about the Daniel case, stating that this guy had died and Wilf and a Poid had been connected to this. So Ainsley is like, okay, like you just interrupted my recreational time, so on and so forth. Come to find out, Ainsley goes on and disconnects from this, and she is just on some roof on some building somewhere. So come to find out, Ainsley and Beatrice are to be the Metropolitan Police looking into this case. So let me see if there's anything really left here that I have to still go on and cover for this episode. No, I think most of it seems covered. All right, so we have Ainsley that makes Ainsley's way to Lev's place. And so we had Ocean and we had Ash. Ash is going on and putting together poids for both Connor and both Burton. And we see Connor's body in this tub, and we see Burton's body in this tub, and we have Connor, who is kind of getting assembled. So both Ash and Ocean are kind of having this dialogue between the two of them that really I don't feel was all that important, but they were to say it in gibberish anyways. So you had to go on and read subtitles between the two of them. I'm like, what is it? Is Lev kind of like bizarrely like taping them or something? Like, is that why they're talking in their pig Latin the way they are? Because in my brain, I'm like, why are they talking in private when they're the only two in the room? I'm so confused. So we have Ocean getting into his attire, and he opens this door to find both Beatrice and Ainsley now at the door waiting to talk to Lev and Wilf. So Ocean goes on to speak with Lev and Wilf, and we have Lev who talks to Wilf and states like, okay, like we have to go in and talk to Ainsley and tell her everything, because more than likely Ainsley will know everything anyways. So like the more and more that we try to fight this, the more and more we'll just be wasting our time, because this girl just or this Ainsley just knows everything anyways. So we might as well just tell her everything we know. So and Wilf was trying to duck out and be like, well, hey, maybe I should just state that I'm not here. And Lev is like, she'll just look for you anyways. So like, don't go on and try to hide yourself. Just be here anyways. Just let's get this over with. So Ainsley comes in and is to kind of look around, and she starts looking at like the chessboard with all these chess pieces. And so we have Ainsley that is trying to use her conversation as chess moves and stuff like that, and try to be very clever, because she is to try to be this knockoff Sherlock Holmes. So we come to have both Lev and we have Wilf that are just telling her everything and asking about the whole tie of Daniel's death and everything like that. So we have in the past where Flynn is to be called upon with both Connor and Burton to get into their headsets so that way they can meet up with Wilf in the future. So all three of them end up getting all headsets so that way they can become their poids. And so Ainsley is looking at all these poids and is stating it's like, oh, okay, so you went on to figure out a way to talk to the past without any real record of you going on and doing so. So, and then all of a sudden, we of course have Flynn that starts talking. So Ainsley's like, okay, all right. So, we end up having Ainsley that is now going to be able to talk to Flynn, first in the past, to just kind of figure things out. And so that's how the episode technically does come to a wrap. With that said, I think I went on and covered most of what is to have happened in this episode. Let me know in the comments below if there's anything, any little moments that I forgot about. I feel like there's something that I did forget. But either way, I think I covered most of this episode anyways. So let me know in the comments below if there's anything left. If there was anything that I should probably rebuttal for the next week's episode. So I'm going to try and get out of here so I can go on and put this out without a doubt. I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.